Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Zimbabwe's newest opposition party plants its flag solidly ahead of next year's general election after besting heavy odds and winning 2/3 of seats in by-elections. The CCC was formed just 3 months ago from a split in the MDC, which used to be the top rival to the ruling party. Also, a 6-year-old dies in Ivory Coast in another building collapse. A wall went down in Abidjan in the third such incident in the city in just over a month. Over a dozen people have been killed in collapses since the end of February. And the effects of the war in Ukraine continue to ripple across Africa. In Tunisia, the tourism and farming industries are particularly worried about the drop in Russian visitors and rise in feed prices. We hear from our correspondents in the country. But first, in Zimbabwe, an opposition party just a few months old has emerged as a serious challenger to the ruling party. The Citizens Coalition for Change formed as a splinter of the country's former top opposition alliance, but won 2/3 of the seats in parliamentary and municipal by-elections over the weekend. Our regional correspondent Nadine Theron tells us more.
Only 3 months after it was founded, the Citizens Coalition for Change started the week by celebrating its sweeping victory at the Zimbabwean by-elections on Saturday. It won 19 out of 28 parliamentary seats and 75 out of 120 council seats. The party was formed after breaking away from the main opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change. It put up a poor electoral showing, despite having triggered the vote by recalling legislators and councillors who didn't support its leader, Douglas Mwanzara. Despite the CCC's strong showing, its leader says the elections were problematic.
We lost one of our members in Midlands. Nothing has happened in terms of the people who did what they did. We had our rallies disrupted, almost 6 to 7 rallies disrupted. Police have been banning and prohibiting our programs. And you know that in the rural areas, as I said, there's intimidation, there's violence, and there's terror.
The ruling party of 40 years, ZANU-PF, won the remaining 9 parliamentary seats and still holds the majority in the National Assembly. President Emmerson Mnangagwa's party retained its rural stronghold and with the win of 2 former MDC wards is making some urban headway.
This is a good sign. We see it as an inflection point, a turning point, that our message is getting through to the urban areas. And President Mnangagwa, because of Open for Business, is resonating with the urban constituents. That's why we also won a number of council seats in urban areas.
With the results being finalized, the stage is now set for 2023's national elections, when the CCC is expected to replace Morgan Tsvangirai's MDC as the main opposition party, as it hopes to dethrone ZANU-PF.
Nadine Theron there for us. A look now at some news in brief from elsewhere on the continent. UN investigators have warned of possible crimes against humanity in Libya that threaten the country's transition to democracy. The independent fact-finding mission spoken of accounts of intimidation of activists, attacks on members of the judiciary, and widespread abuse of migrants. The team's second report looks at the period since last November, which covers the build-up to and postponement of planned elections for last December. The mission slammed a culture of impunity and is trying to verify claims from migrants of mass graves concealed in the city of Bani Walid. A conversation about male victims of sexual assault has been sparked amongst fans of Nigerian Afrobeat singer Ruger after his genitals were grabbed by a fan. The 22-year-old, whose real name is Michael Odebayo Olayinka, was performing in Lagos on Sunday when he was groped. He appeared visibly upset and left the stage shortly afterwards. Many fans have expressed anger and shock and have offered their support. Heavy fighting broke out in eastern DR Congo overnight into Monday as M23 rebels attacked army positions near the border with Uganda and Rwanda. The clashes began near the villages of Tchanzu and Ronyoni, which had briefly been seized by the militia in similar raids last November. Now, the M23 had also seized large parts of the east in 2012 and 2013, but there have since been efforts to get the group to disarm. Its fighters, though, have complained that the peace accord has taken too long and recently accused the army of waging war against them. Now, a 6-year-old is the latest person in Abidjan to lose their life to shoddy construction. The child was killed and several members of his family injured after a neighbour's wall collapsed. Local media reports that at least 14 people have died in building collapses since the end of February, and this is the third such incident in Abidjan in just over a month. Hanan Fejani tells us more.
The deadly incident occurred after the wall of a building collapsed on a neighboring house and destroyed it. In this instance, poor construction and the owner's negligence are to blame. According to the tenants, the landlord had consistently ignored their plea to fix the unstable wall. At the scene, the father of the 6-year-old who passed and his neighbors are still in shock.
There was no foundation holding up the wall, or it wouldn't have fallen. They made me believe that they would come and fix it, but it didn't happen. The work was stopped for a year or so until recently, and then this.
The concrete wall that fell here could have killed the whole family, including the mother and her 2 children. And the father, how would he survive this? Could money replace a human being? No way.
There's no follow-up. If the Ministry of Construction did its job, such tragedies wouldn't happen.
The government's been dubbed passive in the face of the growing number of anarchic and substandard construction in the city. On February 27th and March 7th, 2 separate buildings collapsed, causing the death of 13 people, after which the construction ministry launched investigations and vowed to deploy auditing agents throughout the city. But it also called for individuals to act more responsibly and stop inadequate construction. It is estimated that no official permit is provided for 80% of private constructions taking place in Abidjan.
Hanan Fejani there for us. Now, the war in Ukraine continues to put pressure on key sectors of the Tunisian economy. Tourism and agriculture have already been hit hard. Now, there's also the human impact in the hundreds of students who are still badly affected by their experience of having to flee a war zone in Eastern Europe. Our correspondents tell us more.
Dunya and her sister were in Dnipro in the southeast of Ukraine where they were studying dentistry. They had to leave Ukraine suddenly when the Russian invasion started.
These are the places where there were the first bombings. A friend sent us the location. Everyone was panicking. Banks were closed. People wanted to take out money. They were rushing to get groceries and water.
Today, Dunya continues her studies online, but with fighting intensifying, this academic year might be interrupted. Aside from students, Tunisia's food industry is also facing an uncertain future. Tunisia imports close to half the grains and wheat it needs from Ukraine. Some of that goes to cattle and poultry feed. This animal farmer from Bousalem in Tunisia's north worries he won't be able to get supplies.
This is the extract: soy, corn, and barley. The extract factory told us that it has stocks for 2 months maximum, after which everything depends on the war in Ukraine.
The country is already suffering from inflation with prices increasing for several foodstuffs, and dairy could also be affected soon.
The quantity of milk depends on this extract, so if it's missing, milk production will suffer, and it will affect the price of milk and of red meat.
Other key sectors of the Tunisian economy too have been hit. Tourism was set to recover after the pandemic, but now they expect to lose the Russian market, which made up more than 500,000 tourists in 2019.
At the beginning of the war, there were reservations. But since the war started, they stopped. And today, it's totally unclear.
The closure of airspace to Russian planes has added to the uncertainty, but Tunisian tourism operators are weathering the storm for now, drawing on their experience with multiple crises since the 2011 revolution.
Well, despite protests from activists, a 19th century carved mask from Central Africa has been auctioned off for 4.2 million in the French city of Montpellier. Critics of the sale were calling for it to be returned to its country of origin, Gabon. They've slammed the transaction, vowing to file a complaint. Laurent Berstecker tells us more.
In the middle of the auction, a Gabonese activist interrupts proceedings to denounce what he sees as an illegitimate sale. The item in question, a rare 19th century Gabonese mask, traditionally worn by the Ngil secret society to hunt suspected sorcerers and witches. It was acquired under unknown circumstances by colonial governor René Victor Fournier and was found decades later in near pristine condition by his descendants, who put it up for auction. But the Gabonese activists who interrupted the sale called it an ill-acquired colonial gain, which should be returned to its country of origin.
Governor Fournier at the time, in 1917, is said to have collected this item. But what he did was steal, rob, snatch, and plunder. And we cannot accept that this property is here on display when it has been stolen.
The activists say they've taken legal action for the mask to be returned to Gabon. In the meantime, it was auctioned off for 4.2 million euros, more than 10 times its estimated value.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us, and do so again if you can. Till then, take care.